All right, we're live on YouTube as well. And audio is recording.
All right. Hi, everybody. We're doing another of our infrequently, lightly updated podcasts about history and other stuff we're interested in. Podcast, stream, whatever you want to call it. We're kind of just freewheeling here. We have done some research, but
I'd like to thank all of you for your outreach and support. And
your support means a lot.
That's right. Yeah, so it's right. Continued conversation around the Mexican-American War.
Yes.
And up to now, we've pretty much talked about, I guess, the Northern campaign. I'll call it the Taylor campaign into Mexico.
Yeah, into Mexico, as we think of it now. Today, we're going to talk about some areas, mostly that are now part of America due to this war, which, War of Liberation or War of Conquest is, there's different opinions on that, and we'll get into all that eventually. Was this imperialism, or was this necessary was this what the people wanted? How did this work out? We'll get into some of that eventually, but I think today we're going to focus a little more on what happened, at least at first. We might get to those issues today, but we're just going to kind of talk about what happened in two particular places, I think. New Mexico and California, and we might get into Chihuahua, Mexico as well.
Right, yeah. So this is it's kind of interesting, right? Because with the Zachary Taylor campaign, that was, we've already talked that all the way through Buena Vista.
Yeah.
So we're kind of going back in time now a little bit again to kind of the very start of the Mexican-American War and the campaign in the West.
Yeah.
So, we'll, I think, maybe talk some background first.
Sure. At this time, all these places were very sparsely populated. New Mexico had been basically settled for hundreds of years at this point. Since like the 15th century, I think, they have evidence of Spanish settlers being there, and of course intermarrying with the native population too. There's been a population there for a long time.
Right. Yeah, that's some of those kind of earliest Spanish conquests, right, would go into New Mexico. Yeah.
And then there were also people in California. It was very sparsely populated. It's hard to think of it that way because it's been our most populated state in America for a long time. But in these days, there were very few people there, and there were even fewer people of European descent.
Would have been just like all of, I suppose, Spanish America, right? Where you'd have like missions spread to the far-flung.
Yeah, there were missions, and there were forts, and there were some missions associated with Catholic Church, I guess. But there were also just a lot of settlers, people looking for gold and opportunity, as there were in other parts of the West.
Right. You start to get into the 19th century. You have the Santa Fe Trail is established by 1825.
Yeah.
You start to have a lot more interest, I think, in California in terms of like its ports. So kind of like in other sessions that we've had, there's concern about those dang British, right? And the British aspirations or machinations for control of, say, like San Francisco, or there's obviously the conflict over Oregon going on too that we already talked about,
which of course our greatest naval power at this time was Britain. So if they were dominating at the ports and out of the west coast of North America, that might be a problem for the young nation.
Right, and at this time we're not that far removed from the War of 1812, so we fought them a generation prior anyway. So you've got Texan expansion a little bit going on around this era. Like I know in 1841 there's like a Texan expedition into New Mexico to try to see some of that territory, and they're really poorly supplied, so their effort fails. In 1835, Andrew Jackson had offered to buy Northern California, so there definitely was interest in that manifest destiny of trying to occupy, from sea to shining sea.
And this is where we achieve that, but it starts with, I guess, New Mexico. And the thing about the New Mexico conflict is it really wasn't a conflict. They just walked right in. And I mean, there was some rebellion, but at first they walked right into Santa Fe and took over the capital of Mexico then and now.
Yeah, a lot of the story is just kind of a projection of
it's
both population
power,
migration, and military strength being exerted. And it's that simple, right? It's like, there's kind of Oregon, same thing. There's these different migrations of immigrants basically to these areas where I think that was discussed in the book a little bit. Is could these areas have been taken over even without military force? It's like eventually it seems like they were going to fall under U.S. control.
And they there were conflicts, and we're going to discuss that. There were military battles, but they weren't really like the huge battles in the Northern Mexico campaign, what we're going to get into in further episodes with the Mexico City, battles and all that. It's really battles involving a small number of troops.
Right.
Yeah, very questionable authority and loyalty on all sides. It's kind of interesting for those reasons.
Yeah, I think too that's kind of the most interesting aspect of this part of the saga, of this story, is kind of the characters involved and their motivations and what they're trying to achieve. So yeah, I mean, where do we begin, Tom? Is it, I guess you got what, Kearney gets orders from Polk, right? He's
to go into Mexico, and he does that.
Yeah, so you got Kearney at Fort Leavenworth, and he's tasked with taking Santa Fe, I think.
Yes.
So he does that.
Yeah.
They leave Fort Leavenworth, and there's a lot of parts of this, in the book, again, we're talking about is, so far from God. And there's a lot of parts here where there's these long expeditions, long movements of cavalry, mostly, across these largely desert areas.
I mean, that's a lot of just moving all this stuff. Like in one of the battles we're going to talk about, like they said, the biggest factor was getting the covered wagons across the river, which, that was kind of the transportation issues, I guess you might say. Logistics, maybe, is how you put it. Were the biggest thing.
But right, a lot of this part of the book is like, can we get these 100 guys with their wagons over this range of mountains?
And often we didn't. A lot of them died. A lot of them, if not in battle, just from being in these various conditions, sometimes without adequate food or clothing. Shoes. Lack of shoes seems to be a problem with some of these.
New Mexico is taken really without like a lot of military force, right?
You do have battles later. You had the Tejas Rebellion, which happens later. You have various conflicts with Native Americans, but in terms of actually taking New Mexico, that does happen without a hitch, and is eventually settled with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, I believe.
And there's a lot of would you say is it fair to say that there's pretty good preservation of the rights of citizens that were there already?
Yes, and that's a reason for that is one of the military officers that was there, Alexander Doniphan, and we can begin to talk about him a little bit. I'll go through some facts here.
It's kind of interesting. Like, there's sort of the imposition of different martial law, kind of, or military law in some of these places.
Doniphan is now.
Oh, you want to talk Doniphan?
Yeah.
Okay. Alexander Doniphan.
So he was he was an attorney, which is important for a lot of this. He was famous before this for preventing the execution of founder of the Church of Latter-day Saints. I don't know exactly how to say that, but it's the Mormon Church.
Right.
And yeah, there was a war between Native Missourians and Mormons in 1838, which almost got Joseph Smith killed, the founder of that church. And he would have been killed if Doniphan didn't intervene, which is really something. I mean, he was a lawyer who defended the rights of the accused and was also a military person who fought a lot of important battles, and these are interesting juxtapositions here. Yeah, he was a successful lawyer in Lexington, Missouri, always as a defense attorney, never as a prosecutor. So there you go. Was also a Whig in the state legislature, if he was a real element. Yeah, at the beginning of this war, he was commissioned as a colonel in the Missouri Mounted Volunteers, and was involved in the Santa Fe campaign. Kearny would go on to California once he won the war, which, like I said, they pretty much marched in. There wasn't much of a fight, and then Doniphan was the military commander. And yeah, and from there did the invasion of Chihuahua, which I don't think we'll get into now, but we just want to talk about Doniphan at this time because I think he's an interesting figure. He'll later implemented a legal code in New Mexico, which was known as the Kearny Code, but was the work of Doniphan, I believe. And,
yeah,
interesting in terms of the development of state law and kind of constitutional protections. Interesting legal historical fact for those of you in the legal history, which I'm sure is all of me, but
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like here, there's this note about Kearny, sparing the lives of a few captured spies,
yes.
As he's doing his proclamation of, their occupation. So they are trying to kind of appeal to the local population and kind of have, I guess, sort of a not violent transition of power. Let's see. Yeah, it's an interesting section. So yeah, maybe, I don't know. Let's transition to talking about California.
Sure. Yeah, we can do California.
Yeah, so in California, there's like a couple of different major things going on.
There's various factions. Most of it wasn't settled, of course. You had some settlers in what's now the Sacramento area, known as Sutter's Fort, I believe. And then you had settlers along the coast in what's modern San Diego and LA and Monterey, San Francisco, and Sonoma, which is north of San Francisco, basically up and down the coast. You had settlers. Some of these were Americans, some of these were Mexicans. Many of these Mexicans were known as Californios, and if I'm saying that right, and also
I think you are.
And some of these also wanted independence, and there were American settlers who wanted independence, and there were obviously the interest of the government of America was to make California part of the Union. So there were a lot going on, and of course Native American tribes. So just a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, let's see. By early 1846, there had been 4 separate rebellions in a single decade, one as recently as 1844. So California was already kind of a semi-autonomous region. I guess, very focused on the missions.
Yeah.
So, right, you already have this kind of, semi-autonomy. The Californios.
Californios.
The Californios. So that's kind of interesting too, that it's not really, there's so much change in this era, right? It's like, was Spanish.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's Mexican. Now, in very short order, no, it's Californios.
I mean, really, it's kind of hard to govern from afar since it's so big and there's so few people. And, Mexico City is pretty far away from here. I mean, Washington, D.C. is really far away from there. So there's, you're not going to have much, maybe coherent governance, I guess. Which that leads into the character of John Fremont, which is interesting.
Is that up?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Fremont is an interesting character.
Yes.
For sure.
He was known at the time as one of the explorers, one of the prominent explorers, and was respected for his engineering ability and his exploring abilities. So he was a known figure in America.
He's kind of like a cartographer or something, right?
Yeah.
Or surveyor or something.
Yeah, surveyor, engineer. I mean, kind of map maker, right?
Map making guy.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, which you needed because there weren't a lot of explorations territory and you need maps, and anyone who could figure out what was where was pretty respected. So,
yeah.
He was also had some political prominence. He was the son-in-law of Senator Thomas Hart Benton, which we have discussed him. There were some sentiment in the Polk administration that put him in charge of the Army, which didn't happen. But he was a very powerful figure at this time, a senator from Missouri. So Fremont was a known figure and was very involved in the goings on here. He would have a later life, which is not too relevant to what we're doing here, but he was the first Republican nominee for president in 1856.
Yeah, this guy lived quite a life.
Yeah, he lived quite a life.
So, sorry, he's kind of like a frontiersman.
Yeah.
Army officer, map maker. He, obviously, there's this saga that we're going to talk about.
Before that, he was elected as senator from California. So, yes, he was a prominent figure and later was somewhat discredited. And
I was just on Fremont Street in Vegas. Yes. I assume Fremont Street is named after this
Fremont
guy.
Street, Fremont County in Iowa.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of Fremont counties in Fremont, Nebraska throughout the West. So, Western states and the Midwestern states, I guess. So, just by virtue of his political power, he did not win the presidency. He was beaten by James Buchanan. The Republicans were kind of the remnants of the Whig Party, and they were just really struggling by the 1850s. The failure of the attempts to compromise over slavery just really decimated the Whig Party as it was, and its successor, the Republican Party. So, yeah, and Fremont also got wealthy during this time of the gold rush, but later he would lose his money, and according to our friends at Wikipedia, he died penniless in New York City in 1890. So he was kind of one of those guys who did a lot of adventures, had a lot of ups, had a lot of downs.
Well, he was like big into the railroads too, I think.
Yes.
Which is interesting. So he's like losing money on railroads investment or something.
Yeah.
So anyway, for this part of the story, it's like he's got kind of this like de facto military kind of frontier organization.
Yeah.
Called is it the California Battalion? Something like that.
Something like that.
And they're kind of like fighting natives a lot. I know, like even before the outbreak.
There's a lot of fighting of the natives, and you also have some settlers in the Sacramento area that were kind of loosely affiliated with them. And, kind of one way to look at hostility is really getting kind of ramped up is when the local governor was captured by some of the locals and taken prisoner in nearby Sonoma, we believe. And, that was That was a big thing that was going on there, and Fremont kind of tried to maintain plausible deniability during all this. He claimed he was just going up to Oregon for a mission there, but later the settlers in the Sacramento area declared it basically a free republic, and that's where they had the bear flag, which the bear is still on California's flag, so that's kind of part of the California mythology that there were. That's sort of one of the declarations of independence that happened there, and kind of one of the early things that happened.
Yeah. So the Declaration of is it the Bear Republic?
Yes.
Is that okay? And I don't know. I guess this to me is interesting that it almost seems like Fremont is really making a play for like power for himself.
Yeah.
Like he does a lot of like what he'll reference himself as like commander of all these Northern California forces, and he's got the California Battalion.
Elaborate power that he's given. Later he would try to become the military, basically.
Yeah.
Commander of California.
So as like a captain or whatever, he's really aspiring for much more than his station.
And he did not get along with pretty much any other military officer that I could tell.
Yeah. So at the same time, you have the U.S. Pacific Fleet presence under, I think it's Stockton?
Yeah, Stockton. He replaced an admiral who was getting to retirement age and wanted to be relieved of his duties, and Stockton got there, and so you had a basically Pacific Coast presence of the Navy, which was important for various battles in what is now Mexico, and was pretty decisive, I would say, in what happened in California.
Yeah, so that's Sloat is the Sloat's the older commandant or whatever. Yes. But Sloat does act quickly as far as like he's seizing like Monterey.
Yeah.
So it's like the U.S. Navy starts to take action to seize areas that they're also concerned that the British might seize of all things. So the Bear Republic has been proclaimed, and Sloat is kind of linking up with Fremont and basically saying like, Fremont, you're now part of the U.S. military again, or he's like Sloat is like, I'm in overall command of military forces here in California. But it's interesting, right? Because he doesn't have a lot of power.
No, I mean it's not clear who's right, if anyone. And meanwhile, he had Kearny after his victory in New Mexico. Basically, he and his troops did a very long and slow, arduous journey through the mountains and the trails that were available, and got to California with a very ragtag bunch. We're severely lacking in food and clothing. Yeah,
right. So Fremont, his orders are like, go take control basically of California. Like you assume military command in California. Then you have Stockton telling Fremont to join up with me, in this location. Yeah. And Fremont's like, I'll do it on my own time. Like Fremont is not even obeying Stockton's orders, not specifically anyway. But then, you have those forces, Stockton and Fremont, do seize most of, I think, Southern California also.
Yeah.
Then you've got you've got Kearny showing up, but Kearny doesn't bring all of his troops because Kit Carson had a telegraph or something, or he had a letter, I should say, from the West saying that basically the United States had already seized California.
And meanwhile, the Mexicans were taking back some of these areas.
Right. So it's like, Kearney doesn't bring all of his troops
Yeah.
west because he thinks the United States has taken control of California. But then, right, there's a Californio
Yes.
rebellion,
Yes.
particularly.
And they took back like Los Angeles in particular.
Yeah. And so then the Californios have taken
Yes.
right. So they've got Los Angeles. Then we have Kearney showing up with his like 100 troops, right?
We have the Battle of San Pasqual, which is in the San Diego area.
Yes. So San Pasqual is like not a huge engagement, but it's kind of interesting because it's one case where you have, sort of, the United States military weaponry or technological advantage that's been observed throughout most of this conflict is nullified a little bit by the weather. So it was like very rainy apparently, and also sounds like, maybe like the U.S. forces are disorganized to some extent. And so there's at least this one isolated cavalry charge where the Mexican Lancers, again, we've referenced Lancers before, Napoleonic style formation of cavalry, type of cavalry, where they like charge and they wound, I think, like 18, or they they inflict 18 casualties onto the U.S. troops. So it's a Mexican kind of win in that spot. And then Kearney's forces have to retreat. They have to sneak out some envoys to, I don't know if it's to Stockton, probably. Yeah. It's to whoever's, with the naval forces.
To get reinforcements.
Yeah. Yep, to get relief. And then that does happen. So then they're relieved. They're able to consolidate with the U.S. forces there.
And then eventually they win there. But it seems like just the resilience of the Kearney troops was kind of decisive there.
Yeah.
Pretty rough conditions.
Yeah, there's a lot of resolve, a lot of just, toughness under difficult conditions, for sure. It's another one of these cases where I think it sounds to me like maybe if the Californio, in this case, troops would have pressed their advantage harder, that maybe they could have actually gotten something, done.
Yeah.
That they had a moment there where, they had numerical superiority, they had, momentum on their side, and they didn't really press the advantage as far as I can tell.
Yeah, there was a lot of disorganization with the Californios, as there, it's a consistent theme throughout these times. So they were defeated at San Pasqual, and then they were at Battle of San Gabriel, which is in the Los Angeles area. And then,
most of the fighting in this theater is pretty lopsided.
Yeah.
It seems like it's the same kinds of trends that we've noted with the other battles, technological supremacy, logistical supremacy, leadership, organization, discipline, all on the side of the...
Like we said, there were California victories, but eventually, basically, it was declared for California for America, so United States of America.
Yeah, and then
that was like 1848 when I believe that was finally decisive that we were in charge, and even then it was unclear who was in charge because, like you mentioned, the questions about whether Fremont or Commandant Stockton was in charge, or Kearney.
Right. It's, I think if I'm getting this right, it's like Stockton and Kearney are kind of at odds. Like they have similar military rank.
Yes.
And so Stockton like appoints Fremont as like the overall military governor of California.
Yeah, that's right.
And so then basically Kearney can't really assert his control from his mandate given by the president until later on when more army forces arrive. I think it's like March of 47 until like another battalion of army troops shows up, and then Kearney's able to, I guess, insist or assert, his influence really in conformity with the president, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Right. It's like I'm not totally clear on why would Stockton not have really acknowledged Carney's position. Is it that he's lower ranking than him? I don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe he doesn't have clarity on the orders that Carney has been given by the president.
I mean, I think this is a consistent theme throughout this, the lack of clarity. I mean, which leaves these commanders to basically do whatever they think.
Yeah.
Which is not to say they were completely, going on their own. They were trying to, I think most were trying to do their best to follow orders. I mean, that's questionable in Fremont's case, but in general, I think most of them were just not clear because you're so far away from what's happening.
I suppose Stockton, it's like you're a higher ranking official, right? You're a higher ranking officer within the military. So you're probably thinking like, I've got my orders and I'm not going to, somebody lower ranking than you is showing up saying, hey, I'm appointed to run California. You're saying, well, no, I've gotten my marching orders and I outrank you. So here's what's going to happen, which is really counter to what the president of the United States has said should happen here. It's crazy.
The current town of Stockton, California is named after Calumet Stockton. So they're a large city in the valley there near San Jose and Sacramento.
So let's circle back to Doniphan for a second.
Okay.
So Doniphan, he's left back in New Mexico. He's part of that force with Carney, who takes Santa Fe and all that. And then I think he was supposed to link up with Wool or something, with some of Taylor's campaign, but that doesn't happen. He ends up marching on El Paso.
Yeah.
So he takes El Paso, and then they move on to Chihuahua in northern Mexico. And there's a somewhat more significant battle fought there. That is the Battle of Sacramento.
Yeah.
So it's not like right at Chihuahua. It's like in some heights outside of there.
Yes. And this is not Sacramento, California.
No, not Sacramento.
Keep this clear.
Just to be clear, not in California now. So now in kind of back in northern Mexico.
Tell us about this battle, what we have. It's one of the more lopsided ones for the United States.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have like a ton of details, but it's another case where, the Mexicans outnumber the U.S. forces involved. It's like about 1,000 on the U.S. side, and it's somewhere around 2,800 on the Mexican side. The Mexicans, I think, make an interesting tactical choice, which is that they're thinking, let's be on the defensive.
Yeah.
They're thinking that, that can work to their advantage, that they don't have maybe as great of maneuverability as the Americans. So there's like this series of redoubts, which are basically, like defensive works, earthworks, that sort of thing, that they think they've got well positioned to defend themselves. Well, basically the U.S. comes around to the western side of these fortifications, and the Mexicans were not well prepared to defend that area. So also they talk about like unlimbering the artillery at very close range. So apparently that's like, it's the 1st Missouri Mounted Infantry is the main force involved here, but they also have this Missouri Artillery, and they unlimber that artillery, I guess, quite close to the Mexican positions. But it's very damaging. And I know that they talk about, like, I think a attempted charge being eliminated via canister shot. So again, the ordnance choice is very damaging against the Mexican side here. To me, that's like the biggest theme that I hear in all these battles is really that grape shot or canister ordnance or explosive shell ordnance is really decisive.
So it's basically technological superiority at the time is kind of decisive in so many of these.
Pretty much. Yeah, I think that's a lot of it, and that in tandem with organization, just staying organized, out maneuvering the opponent. Yeah.
I mean, Doniphan was certainly an impressive figure in a lot of ways, historically, and military tactics certainly seemed like part of it for somebody who did a lot of things. Was defense lawyer.
Yeah, a lot of these guys have some really interesting lives for sure.
Yes. I mean, I guess you had to do a lot of things in those days when you were a pioneer, and there weren't a lot of people to go to do things. You might have to do it yourself. So
yes, very enterprising, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess a major flaw in the Mexican battle plan there was just that thinking that the opponent could not approach from the west. Yeah. So there's something there about the topography and the technology used at the time where they thought that wasn't going to be achievable, and it was. So something that simple too.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to see that could be one's undoing.
Sometimes failure of imagination, right?
Kind of seems to be, yeah. That is always an interesting thing with different battles where you'll just, somebody will make some judgment about topography, and it's like, it just wasn't correct. So, yeah. So anyway, it's an interesting. I know we're going a little bit longer than we usually do, but what do you make of this whole, I guess, Western theater saga, Tom? Because after this, we'll transition to the Eastern campaign and everything with Winfield Scott.
I mean, how relatively easy it was. There were certainly battles fought in California has won some, and Mexico won some, but Native Americans, there were a lot of battles there, but generally how easy it was compared to how hugely consequential it was. I mean, most of what we talked about are not Chihuahua, but the rest of it are the parts of what was thought to be Mexican territory that is now part of America. And in the case of California, the most economically and socially important part of America, one might argue.
Yeah.
And that,
right. When you're talking about maybe like 100 people will decide to go do
incredibly obscure history, and military figures that are not considered to be the greatest military figures in American history were so consequential here.
Yeah, I think the Fremont to me is really interesting. Like how I'll call it enterprising he was. He's like really. This is almost that part of history that has like Aaron Burr and his. What would you call it? His designs on having his own country. Basically, the first half of the 19th century is still like that.
Yeah, if we ever figure out a way to tie Aaron Burr into this somehow, which is unlikely, but it would be an interesting thing to talk about.
Well, yeah, because Fremont, I don't think we said this. Fremont was after Kearny took control, basically, of the situation. Eventually, he's like, okay, Fremont, you're going to accompany me back to Leavenworth. And then he does get court-martialed back at Leavenworth. And then I guess the president kind of pardons him or reduces it.
Yeah, no, I mean, there were a lot. Seems like there were a lot more presidential pardons back then. I mean, at least until recent years, it's kind of ramped up again. But there was a lot of court-martialing. There was a lot of accusations of, not listening to your superior officers, but there was a lot of pardoning too, which makes one think that a lot of this is pretty political. But, also, in the case of Fremont, it was probably right. I mean, he did, from what I've read. So.
Right. He's being a rascal. He's trying to become his own dictator or something.
Dictator, and like I mentioned, he did. This was the time of the California Gold Rush, which is why you had an increasing amount of American settlers there, and people wanted to get rich, and Fremont did get rich for a while. And a lot of reason people want to be there and be in charge of things. And,
I actually did look up I guess there was some act of Congress or something. I think it's like from 1794, where it's like, private citizens are not free to wage war. That like you are not allowed to conduct warfare against countries that we're at peace with. And I thought, like, what a funny law, that, like, no, that's at some point Congress had to say, like, no, you can't do that. And what it came out of, in part, was during the French Revolutionary Wars, there's all these like private privateers, and the French are trying to get private actors in America to like attack Canada or seize British merchant shipping. Or Spanish, because at that stage of the French Revolutionary Wars, Spain was also at war against France. And so, so...
around this time, you had, like, Shays Rebellion and all kinds of things going on. And as we have discussed, the initial government of America was quite weak. So, a lot of, groups of farmers or people out there could organize a militia, and we have the Second Amendment, which refers to militia, of course. What else that may refer to is very controversial, but it does refer to militias. And, that was a major activity of people back then to be involved in militias, which maybe for self-defense. Maybe you wanted to go attack somebody, so Congress had to step in and say, no, you can't attack people. The government is peaceful.
And that's what Fremont's doing, right? I mean, Fremont and his Northern California militia basically is like, it's a local group of people. They're attacking natives. They're attacking the Californios, and they're just kind of exerting power in their local area with force.
And some of these things took place before, I could be wrong about this, before the War Declaration that was made it out there, right? Yeah.
Right. That's the whole thing. Is Sloat thinks that what Fremont is doing is pursuant to the U.S. government's orders, and that's not the case. Fremont is he's just stirred up the locals, and they're just, they're trying to say, like, well, if war with Mexico breaks out, we're going to be here to help you and stuff. But no, they're just going even beyond that. They're just proactively starting to fight against, local authority, whether that's considered Mexican authority or whether that's California authority. They're just on the offensive even before there's an official declaration of war, or certainly before they're aware. So that's funny too, to think that, like, the actual military forces of the Navy under Sloat are assuming that what Fremont is doing is authorized by the government, and it's not.
Fog of war happens in every war, but with that problem is helped by modern communications and that kind of thing.
We're back to the communications. Crazy. Yeah. Well, no, definitely right. Highly consequential for the, I guess, the amount of
that's what I think.
Troops
interesting how consequential it ended up being, and some of these characters are interesting. I mean, the actual, like I said, military engagements are probably, there's no Gettysburg in here or anything that interesting, but I do think that, basically how consequential it was in some of these characters, or why this part of the book interested me more than some other parts, really.
It is, it's an interesting thing, and the U.S. was so aggressive here, or these actors were so aggressive about, like, it's like, where are we going to be at in terms of peace negotiation too? Like, where they're going all the way down to seizing something like Chihuahua. It's like, it's way more than just Northern California or something. It's like you're so aggressively pursuing this conflict into Mexican territory. So, of course, from a Mexican perspective, it would all be Mexican territory, but I guess I just mean beyond modern. So obviously then when you get to the negotiating table, you got a lot of leverage there, where you've already taken so much territory all over. So, all right.
I think that's a good place to stop. We're at about 45 minutes, so thank you for staying with us longer than usual. We'll be back with you the next time we're back with you. Can't tell you when, but those of you, I'll
We've got somebody from WhatsApp.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
When we come back, I suppose we'll be talking about Winfield Scott and
Yes.
probably like Vera Cruz and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
thank you, everybody.
Yep. Thanks.